Rain poured heavily that night in Nashville, Tennessee. Outside a modest wooden house, the wind howled as if it wanted to tear the roof off. Inside, seated alone at a simple table, was Grace Miller, a 27-year-old woman with her eyes fixed on a notebook filled with scribbles and dreams. Her fingers trembled over the pages, as if afraid that the hope written there was just an illusion. In that moment of solitude, amid thunder and tears, the cornerstone of her journey was born, a patience that would blossom into dreams greater than she could ever imagine. Hello, friends from Tales of Faith. I'm Elias, and I invite you to join me on this inspiring journey where we'll discover how faith and patience can turn pain into triumph. Get ready, because this isn't just a story about waiting, it's a story about trusting. Grace always believed she was called to something bigger. Since childhood, she dreamed of being an artist, writing songs and sharing messages that would inspire others. But life seemed to keep saying no. Working as a waitress in a small cafe, she found herself trapped in overdue bills, daily frustrations, and the feeling that everyone around her was moving forward while she remained stuck. But friends, what if I told you that the moments when we feel most stuck might be the very times when God is preparing the ground? If you were in Grace's shoes, what would you do in that moment of despair? Would you dwell on failures, or would you believe something greater is happening behind the scenes of your life? On that stormy night, Grace didn't know it, but her patience was about to be tested in a way so profound that it would change not only her life, but the lives of many around her. The days that followed felt like an endless cycle for Grace. Her alarm rang at 5 a.m. She got ready quickly and walked to the cafe where she worked. There, amidst heavy trays and rushed orders, her mind drifted to dreams of lit stages and song lyrics that could touch hearts. But at the end of each shift, all she brought home were a few dollars in tips and bone-deep exhaustion. Neighbors would say, "Grace has so much talent, but she's still stuck here." Those words stung more than any criticism because they echoed her own insecurities. Sometimes, alone in her room, she prayed, "Lord, am I not ready? Or was this dream never meant for me?" The feeling of being forgotten by time, and even by God, haunted her. But it's in these moments that patience begins to take root. Have you ever felt trapped in a wait that seems endless? Have you ever wondered if your efforts will ever pay off? One day, while wiping down tables after her shift, the cafe's radio was left on. A simple song about faith and hope began to play. Grace stopped, resting the damp cloth on the table, and stood still, listening to every verse. Her eyes filled with tears. That song felt like it was written for her. In that moment, she realized that maybe God was still writing her song, just in His timing, not hers. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Maybe I just need to wait a little longer." That's when a thread of patience began to weave itself into her soul. But little did Grace know, the test of that patience would grow even deeper, and the path to her dreams would lead through storms greater than she could imagine. Winter came early to Nashville, bringing not only biting cold, but also a flood of worries for Grace. Bills piled up. The heater in her small house started failing, and to make matters worse, the cafe cut back on employees' hours. That meant less money at the end of the month and uncertainty about how to survive. One morning, as she counted coins to pay for the bus, Grace felt a deep ache in her chest. Life felt like a narrow hallway with no way out. "How can I dream of songs when I can barely keep my lights on?" she muttered. Her mind swirled with thoughts of giving up, but she clung to a thread of hope. She began writing more in her notebook, turning tears into lyrics. Each verse was an attempt to ease her pain while keeping the flame of patience alive. One line she scribbled read, "Maybe waiting is just God's way of teaching me to sing with more truth." Have you ever been through something like this? When life feels like it's closing in, do you give up on your dreams, or do you keep believing something good can grow from the pain? One night after an exhausting shift, Grace picked up her old guitar, leaned against her bedroom wall, and began to sing softly. The melody was simple, but carried the raw truth of her life. Unbeknownst to her, her neighbor, an older woman named Mary Thompson, heard everything through the window. The next day, Mary knocked on her door with a smile. "Grace, that song you sang last night, it touched my heart. You need to share it with more people." Those words were like a ray of light breaking through the clouds. Grace smiled shyly, hardly believing what she'd heard. Maybe her patience wasn't just about waiting. It was the beginning of something greater taking root. Mary Thompson wasn't just any neighbor. A woman of faith, widowed for many years, she had found solace in music during her own painful days. Hearing Grace's song that night stirred something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. So she insisted Grace sing again, this time in her living room, just for her. At first, Grace hesitated. Her heart raced, her hands grew sweaty. Singing for someone felt like exposing herself in a way that made her vulnerable. But seeing Mary's kind eyes, she decided to try. She grabbed her guitar and, with a trembling voice, sang one of the songs she'd written during her lonely nights. When she finished, Mary was in tears. "Grace, this is a gift. Don't hide what God has given you. You need to share this message with more people." Those words echoed in Grace's heart for days. For the first time in a long time, she believed her patience might be leading somewhere. But alongside that hope came fear. What if no one else liked her music? What if she was ridiculed? Have you ever faced an opportunity that felt too big for your courage? Have you ever felt the weight of taking a step that could change everything? Mary didn't stop there. One Saturday, she took Grace to a small gathering at the local church where people shared songs, poems, and testimonies. Grace, still unsure, brought her guitar. When her turn came, her voice quivered, but as she sang, something shifted. The room's silence gave way to tears, smiles, and heartfelt applause. In that moment, Grace realized her patience wasn't in vain. God was opening a door. Small, but enough to show her she wasn't alone. The seed was beginning to sprout. The night Grace sang at the church, she returned home feeling lighter than she had in months. She had found a place where her voice was not only heard, but embraced. But, as often happens, the initial excitement soon collided with harsh reality. The days that followed were filled with long shifts at the cafe, weary glances, and bills piling up on the table. The spark that had ignited seemed ready to flicker out again. One morning, Grace received a notice. Her rent was overdue, and if she couldn't pay, she faced eviction. It was as if the ground had been pulled from under her. She fell to her knees, tears streaming, and asked, "Lord, if you've truly called me to something, why does everything seem to be falling apart?" God's silence felt deafening. No immediate answers, no quick fixes, just the weight of waiting. This is the point where many give up. What about you? What would you do in that silence? Would you see it as a no, or would you have the patience to trust that even in silence God is still working? Grace chose not to give up. Instead of sinking into despair, she grabbed her notebook and began writing a new song. It was a cry, a prayer in melody. "Even in silence I trust, even in pain I wait." Each word reflected the inner struggle she faced. Days later, Mary showed up at her door again, carrying a basket of food and a warm smile. "Grace, don't give up. Remember, every great story goes through a season of silence before the victory." Those words reignited something within her. Maybe this moment wasn't the end, but the preparation for something greater. Her patience was being refined, and her faith tested. Little did she know, an unexpected encounter would soon change the course of her journey. It was a chilly Sunday afternoon when Grace decided to take her guitar to a nearby park. Sitting on a wooden bench surrounded by bare winter trees, she played softly to herself. Music was her way of breathing, of not drowning in her worries. As her fingers moved across the strings, a voice gently interrupted. "That song, did you write it?" Grace looked up to see a middle-aged man in simple clothes holding a notebook. His name was Daniel Harper, a retired music producer who had worked with local artists in the 90s. He explained that he often came to the park to write reflections, and Grace's melody had drawn him in. Blushing, Grace replied, "Yes, I wrote it. It's just a prayer in the form of a song." Daniel smiled and said, "Maybe that's exactly the kind of music the world needs to hear right now." Grace's heart raced. Was this just a coincidence or a sign? Daniel invited her to share more of her songs at a small community studio he still maintained. Grace hesitated, but Mary West's words echoed in her mind. "Don ti hide what God has given you." What about you? If in the middle of your struggle, someone believed in you more than you believed in yourself, would you trust them, or would fear steal the opportunity? The following week, Grace mustered the courage to go to the studio. Her hands trembled, but as she sang, Daniel closed his eyes and nodded in approval. "Grace, your voice has something rare. It's not just technical, it's honest. That can't be wasted." In that moment, a new horizon began to open. For the first time, Grace saw that her patience was leading her to divinely orchestrated encounters. But with this new door came greater trials, because every dream that blooms must withstand the wind before it grows. The first time Grace stepped into Daniel's studio felt like crossing a threshold. The walls were lined with old posters, photos of artists, and dusty shelves of instruments. It wasn't a modern studio, but it had soul. Daniel asked her to record one of her songs to see how her voice would sound professionally. Grace took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and sang with all the emotion she'd bottled up inside. When she finished, a reverent silence filled the room. Daniel, with quiet tears in his eyes, said, "Grace, your voice isn't just beautiful, it's necessary." Those words filled her heart with hope, but also with fear. Because now this wasn't just a dream tucked away in a notebook, it was becoming real. And when something becomes real, insecurity follows. What if I'm not enough? Daniel began helping her, recording simple tracks and encouraging her to share them online. But with every step, Grace fought an inner battle, fear of judgment, fear of rejection. Have you ever felt that pit in your stomach when an opportunity finally arrives? Have you noticed how it's easier to dream than to face the reality of that dream? The first video Grace posted was recorded in the studio. She sang about faith in silence, about waiting when there are no answers. Within days, dozens of people commented, "This song spoke to me. It's like you wrote my story," Grace cried, reading each message. But she also felt the growing weight of responsibility. And yet, her personal struggles didn't vanish. Bills still loomed, the threat of eviction lingered, and the cafe demanded long shifts. Living between the weight of survival and the pull of her dream was a daily challenge. But even in her exhaustion, Grace held fast to the promise in her heart. Patience that blooms isn't passive. It is an active force that keeps believing, even when everything seems stacked against it. The weeks that followed were a true test of fire for Grace. On one hand, her music was starting to touch hearts through social media. On the other, life offered no reprieve. The cafe demanded overtime, rent remained overdue, and the threat of eviction grew more real. She was torn between two worlds, survival and dreams. One particularly grueling night, after a double shift at the cafe, Grace came home to find an official notice taped to her door. She had 10 days to pay her debt or face eviction. The paper in her hands felt heavier than any tray she'd ever carried. She collapsed onto her bed, clutching her guitar, and poured out her heart. "Lord, how can I sing about hope when everything inside me screams despair?" This is the point in life where many feel like giving up. If you were in her place, what would you do? Would you choose the safety of a steady job, even if it suffocated your calling, or would you risk everything for a dream that still felt distant? The next day, Grace nearly skipped going to Daniel's studio, but Mary, her faithful neighbor, showed up at her door again. "Sweetheart, don't stop now. Waiting is painful, but patience is like a tree's roots, invisible, but essential for the fruit to grow." With that encouragement, Grace found the strength to go to the studio. There, Daniel had a surprise. "I've invited some friends to hear you sing. They work at local radio stations. This could be your chance." Her heart pounded. It was an incredible opportunity, but also a huge risk. If it didn't work out, it could crush her hopes. Through tears, she prayed silently, "God, if this is your will, open this door." In that moment, Grace understood that patience wasn't just waiting, it was moving forward, even when her feet ached. That night, Daniel's studio felt too small for the tension in the air. 3 men and a woman, all connected to local radio stations, sat in wooden chairs, watching Grace tune her guitar. The silence was so thick she could hear her own heartbeat. She took a deep breath and began to sing. The melody spoke of waiting for morning through dark nights, of trusting when no way out was visible. Her voice wavered at first, but grew steady, as if each word was a reminder to herself. Patience isn't wasted time. It's the soil where dreams take root. When she finished, the room stayed quiet for a few seconds until one of the women smiled, visibly moved. "That song, it's real. It doesn't feel made to sell. It feels made to heal." The others nodded. One of the men said, "We could play this on our local show. People need to hear it." Grace covered her face, stunned. It was the first time someone outside of Mary and Daniel had validated her talent. A door was opening. Not yet the glowing stage she'd dreamed of as a child, but a start. But with the joy came the weight of responsibility. What if her life fell apart before she could seize this chance? What if eviction forced her to leave everything behind? Have you ever lived through a moment like this? When something starts going right, but the circumstances around you seem to conspire against it? That night, as she walked home, Grace looked up at the starry sky and whispered, "Lord, if this is the door you've opened, give me the patience to walk through it in your time, not mine." She didn't know it yet, but that small step would echo her music far beyond what she could imagine. But before the harvest, the hardest winter of her journey was still to come. The invitation to have her song played on local radio should have been a moment of celebration, but for Grace, it marked the start of her most bitter trial. Days before the debut, a court officer returned. She had less than a week to vacate her home. There was no more delaying the inevitable. Suddenly, everything that seemed stable crumbled. That night, Grace packed her few clothes into old boxes and sat on the cold living room floor, her guitar by her side. The feeling was crushing. How could someone on the verge of having their song on the radio also be losing the roof over their head? She cried until she fell asleep, clutching the instrument that symbolized both her pain and her hope. The next day, she told Daniel what was happening. He was quiet for a moment before saying, "Grace, you can stay at the studio for a while. It's not comfortable, but it's a shelter." She accepted, grateful but also ashamed. Sleeping on a worn-out couch surrounded by equipment felt more like a step backward than forward. Yet it was there, in the silence of cold nights, that she wrote the song that would change everything. Through tears and prayers, she crafted a hymn of resilience, its lyrics declaring that patience is the root that holds the tree steady in the storm. Have you ever faced a winter like this in your life? When it feels like God opens a door but allows the wind to nearly slam it shut. On the day of the radio debut, Grace walked to the station in her simplest clothes. No one knew she'd been sleeping on a couch or that her heart carried such weight. But when the microphone opened and her song played for hundreds of listeners, something miraculous happened. The station's phone lines lit up with calls from people saying they'd cried, felt encouraged, or found hope in their own pain. For the first time, Grace understood that her suffering hadn't been in vain. It was blossoming into dreams that touched other lives. The radio station's phone wouldn't stop ringing. People of all ages and backgrounds said the same thing. Grace's song had touched their deepest wounds. One woman shared that she'd been on the verge of giving up on life, but found hope in Grace's music. A man revealed he was battling debt and loneliness, but found strength in her simple melody. Listening to each testimony, Grace's heart swelled with gratitude. Suddenly it all made sense. The cold nights on the studio couch, the lonely tears over her notebook, the threat of eviction. Every piece had been raw material for a song that now gave life to others. It was as if her pain had become a seed planted in countless hearts. Daniel looked at her, his voice thick with emotion. "Grace, do you see it now? Patience wasn't just about waiting for your dreams. It was about letting God refine you so that in His timing, your music could carry the power to heal." Have you ever realized that sometimes waiting isn't just about you, but about the impact your story can have on others? The days that followed brought unexpected invitations. Local churches asked her to sing, small events opened their stages to her music, and even a Christian production company reached out interested in her work. Grace still didn't have money, still faced practical struggles, but she now carried something greater, the certainty that her patience hadn't been wasted. At one of these performances, Mary, her faithful neighbor, sat in the audience. Seeing Grace sing before dozens of people, she wept with joy. After the event, she hugged her and said, "I knew this gift couldn't stay hidden. I knew that in God's time it would bloom." In that embrace, Grace felt she wasn't just a singer chasing a dream. She was a living testimony that waiting with faith can transform countless lives. Months passed since the night Grace's song aired on the radio. What once seemed impossible began to unfold. Her music gained traction on local programs, small concerts, and digital platforms. People didn't just hear her lyrics, they experienced real change because of them. The young woman who nearly lost everything was now remembered as someone who offered hope through her pain. One day, after performing at a simple conference organized by local churches, Grace was called back to the stage, not to sing, but to listen. Hundreds of voices joined in a chorus, singing the refrain of her song, "Even in silence I trust, even in pain I wait." The entire auditorium became a living testament that the patience once thought barren had blossomed into collective dreams. Grace wept before the crowd, not because she'd found fame or wealth, but because she understood her mission was far greater, to use her voice to remind people that waiting on God is never in vain. Have you ever considered that the pain you face today might be the fertile soil for something that will bless many tomorrow? Have you reflected that your waiting might not just be about your victory, but about the miracle God wants to work through you? That night, as she returned to her new home, simple but filled with peace, Grace knelt and prayed, "Lord, thank you for turning my tears into seeds and my patience into flowers of hope. May every song I sing be a reflection of your love." Grace's story reminds us that patience isn't wasted time. It's faith in motion. It's the courage to wait when everything inside screams to give up. And when we trust in God's perfect timing, dreams bloom, not just for us, but for everyone whose path we cross. Grace's story is a powerful reminder that patience isn't a useless burden, but a divine tool to shape our character and prepare our dreams. Like her, we often feel forgotten, silently fighting our battles while asking God, "How long?" But the Bible assures us we're not alone in this process. In Psalm 41 we read, "I waited patiently for the Lord. He turned to me and heard my cry." This promise shows that God's silence is never absence, it's preparation. Grace's wait felt long and unfair, but it was during that time that her songs gained depth, authenticity, and the power to touch hearts. Another verse that echoes her story is Galatians 6:9. Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. Patience is the soil where faith's seeds sprout. It's in perseverance that the harvest of dreams is born. Maybe like Grace, you're facing a painful winter where everything seems lost. But remember, the greatest fruits grow after the coldest seasons. Wait, trust, keep walking. Patience is the secret soil where God prepares miracles. Let us pray. Lord, help us trust in your timing, even when we don't understand the silence. Give us patience to wait with faith and courage, to not give up on the dreams you've placed in our hearts. Turn our tears into seeds and let hope bloom in our lives. In Jesus' name, amen. May this story strengthen your faith. Share in the comments. What would you do if you were in Grace's shoes? Subscribe to Tales of Faith and turn on notifications so you don't miss more inspiring stories like this. Until next time, God bless you.